Silas, it's time for new leadership. You've done a great job, but your style is outdated.
Outdated, you say? Funny. I was building this company before you learned how to spell leadership.
He didn't knock. He just pushed the door open, sunlight trailing behind him like a spotlight that thought too highly of itself. The folder hit my desk with a flat thud, scattering invoices and the smell of lemon disinfectant. "We're going in a new direction," Evan Coulter said, as if he were auditioning for a leadership documentary no one asked for. I stared at him, 32, sharp suit, sharper ego, the kind of man who believed PowerPoint slides were strategy and buzzwords were oxygen. I was in the middle of reviewing a 10-year contract supplying meals for the National Hospital Network, the same deal that kept Verdant Foods alive through 3 recessions. But apparently, I lacked the energy for innovation. He didn't sit down. "Silas, it's time for fresh leadership. You've done good work, but your style." He paused, searching for a polite insult. "Is dated. We need people who think faster." I almost laughed. This from the man who once called our central kitchen a food factory because he couldn't tell the difference between logistics and lunch. If you've ever had a boss like that, someone who mistakes noise for vision, you'll understand this moment. Tell me, where are you listening from right now? And if you want to hear how this story unfolds, make sure you subscribe. There's a lot more cooking behind this door. Shock has a strange rhythm. It doesn't explode. It tightens right behind the ribs. I felt it there. A pulse I refused to feed. "Understood," I said, steady as a metronome. Years of running operations had trained me to keep my face still while everything else burned. Evan straightened his tie, clearly disappointed I hadn't begged. "HR will handle your severance. Please return your badge and laptop by 5. He turned, already congratulating himself for modernizing the company. When the door shut, the room felt suddenly larger. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner, the one where I kept samples for quality control, filled the silence. I looked around at the whiteboards, the planning charts, the empty coffee mug that still said, "Verdant built on integrity," in my pocket. The old pocket watch my father left me ticked once, twice, 5 o'clock, end of shift, end of era. I stood, collected my notes, and walked out without a word. The hallway smelled of bleach and ambition. Outside, the sky hung low, metallic and cold. I took one breath, slow and deliberate, then pulled out my phone. A single message. Activate the file. Clause 9. 3 weeks before the day Evan threw me out of my own company. I turned 52, the same age my father was when he founded Verdant Foods. The morning was quiet. Too quiet for a birthday. No phone calls, no messages from the office, just a small, sealed envelope waiting on my kitchen counter, the kind of off-white paper that already smelled like memory. The handwriting on the front was his. "Open only when you're my age," it said in the same looping script that used to sign my report cards. I hesitated before tearing the seal. Inside were 2 things, a handwritten letter and a folded legal document with the embossed seal of Green Harvest Trust. The letter began without preamble. "Silas, if you're reading this, the kitchen is cooled. It's your turn to bring back the heat. You'll find enclosed what's rightfully yours, 75% of Verdant Foods, transferred to your name with full voting rights. Use it when the company forgets what food is supposed to mean." I read it twice before the words began to sink in. 75%. For a long moment, I simply sat there, staring at the letter as if it were a trick of light. My father, a man who once refused to buy a second delivery truck until every driver had proper health insurance, had left me the majority of the company hidden. Waiting? He had known this day might come, when corporate language would replace human taste, when people like Evan would talk about synergy while forgetting salt. I placed the letter on the counter and leaned back, the chair creaking under my weight, the silence pressed close. That night, I cooked nothing. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in the dark kitchen, and listened to the hum of the old refrigerator. It was the same one my father used to keep samples in, now empty except for a half jar of mustard. The motor rattled softly, a sound like a tired old man trying to breathe through dust. It hit me harder than I expected, the absence, the echo, the weight of time. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel it grief, quiet and heavy, not for him, but for the version of me that had waited too long to act. My hands rested on the table, still as marble. Then something shifted, slow but certain, the way a stove clicks before the flame appears. I reached for the trust document again and read the fine print. The shares were held under Green Harvest Trust, completely anonymous. The board had no idea. The company I built, the one they thought they owned, was still mine. The sorrow didn't fade. It refined itself into focus. My father's handwriting stared back at me when the kitchen grows cold. Light it again with your own hands. I smiled faintly. All right, Dad, I murmured. Let's turn the heat back on. The cafe across from Verdant Foods headquarters had been there longer than the glass tower itself, a narrow, brick-walled place that still smelled faintly of roasted beans and old newspapers. I chose the corner booth facing the window. From there, I could see the building that used to feel like mine, 43 stories of stainless steel, tinted glass, and arrogance. Lawrence Price arrived first, his gray hair slicked back, his posture still military straight despite 70 years and a dozen corporate wars. He had represented my father before me and still carried a pocket fountain pen like it was a sword. You look rested, he said dryly, sitting down. I've had 3 weeks of forced vacation, I replied. Doctor's orders. From a man without a medical degree. Rita Nguyen came next, balancing a laptop and 2 espresso cups. Once my father's sous chef, now one of the most feared financial analysts in the state. She'd traded her apron for numbers, but still wore that same calm precision, like every decimal mattered. We didn't waste time on pleasantries. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence while I laid out my plan. A special shareholders meeting, I said quietly. 5 days from now. I'll make it official through the trust. By the time they realize who holds the majority vote, it'll be too late to rearrange the table. Lawrence nodded, already noting details in his small leather book. We'll need to issue notice 48 hours in advance to remain compliant with corporate code. I'll draft the legal grounds for leadership review. Rita's eyes glinted behind her glasses, and I'll prepare the data to bury him. For a moment, serenity hovered between us, the kind that comes right before a storm you've chosen to start. I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl fade into black. If they think I only know how to fry potatoes, I said, voice low, edged with irony, then on that day, I'll teach them how to roast reputations. Lawrence smirked, the faintest ghost of pride in his eyes. Your father would have enjoyed that line. We reviewed documents, timelines, and procedures until the afternoon light turned copper. Outside, the glass facade of Verdant glimmered beautiful, hollow, and about to crack. Then Rita's laptop chimed. She frowned, reading an incoming message. You'll want to see this. She slid the screen toward me. It was an internal audit report, confidential, half deleted, but still visible in metadata. Evan Coulter's name appeared 23 times. Adjusted revenue figures, manipulated supplier invoices, deferred debt entries marked pending reconciliation. My pulse didn't rise, it simply steadied. Where did this come from? I asked. Anonymous drop, she said. But the file path traces back to his executive folder. He's been inflating sales to mask unpaid supplier contracts. Classic short-term gloss. Lawrence looked up slowly. Then we have more than a vote. We have a reckoning. I closed the laptop, calm settling over me like a clean chef's coat. Good, I said. Then let's get cooking. The boardroom smelled faintly of citrus polish and self-congratulation. Evan Coulter stood at the far end of the long oak table, sleeves rolled up just enough to look visionary, pacing in front of a pastel green slide that read, Green Vision 2030. The colors were soft, the voice syrup sweet, the kind of presentation that could lull an investor to sleep while he emptied the coffers. Verdant Foods, he declared, clicking through bullet points like a magician with no rabbits, is not just a food supplier, we're a sustainability movement. Each sentence sparkled with the same buzzwords he'd stolen from last month's TED Talk synergy. Innovation. Forward momentum. I could almost taste the artificial sweetener in his tone. Through the frosted glass. I watched the board nod along, They looked more sedated than persuaded. That seemed like a good moment to enter. The door opened with a soft click. Heads turned. For a second. No one spoke, maybe because no one expected the ghost of last quarter's dismissal to walk in. I stepped inside, wearing the same gray vest I'd worn the day they fired me. The folder in my hand wasn't thick, but the weight of it changed the air. "Sorry to interrupt the banquet," I said evenly, setting the folder on the table. "But it seems you've all forgotten to check the main course." A few awkward chuckles, quickly swallowed. Evan blinked, smile frozen halfway. "Silas, this is a private shareholders meeting," I finished for him, opening the folder. "Perfect. Then I'm exactly where I belong." The sound of paper sliding across wood cut through the silence. At the top, stamped and notarized Certificate of Ownership, 75% controlling shares, Verdant Food Supply. Evan stared at it as if the text might rearrange itself into something friendlier. Around the table, chairs creaked, someone dropped a pen. Silence thickened until I could hear the projector hum behind him. "Is this some kind of joke?" Evan asked finally. "Voice too high for the room. Only if you find math funny," I said. "Which, judging by the ledgers, you might." I turned toward the screen, plugged in my own drive, and replaced his pastel dreamscape with a spreadsheet columns of red numbers blinking under the heading Deferred Liabilities, Unreported Supplier, Debt. The room seemed to tilt. "These figures," I said quietly, "don't appear in your Green Vision presentation. Probably just an oversight." Evan lunged for the clicker, desperate to regain control, but the numbers stayed frozen. Two of the senior investors, pale and speechless, pushed back their chairs. "We'll abstain from the vote," one murmured. Evan's jaw clenched. "You think you can walk in here and I'm not walking in," I said. Calm as breath. "I'm taking my seat." He fell silent, and for the first time in years, the boardroom truly did too. The boardroom felt colder now, stripped of its usual perfume of power. The slides were gone, the pastel slogans dimmed, and only the sound of the air conditioning filled the silence. I stood at the head of the table, the same spot Evan had claimed an hour ago, only this time the air was still. Waiting. "I'm calling this special session to order." I said, "Agenda Leadership Review." My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to authority. I'd learned. Works best when it doesn't ask for permission. I opened the folder, the pages crisp and quiet. Effective immediately. "I'm submitting a motion to remove Mr. Evan Coulter from the position of Chief Executive Officer." A murmur rolled through the room. Not outrage, not shock, just the sound of people realizing they'd bet on the wrong horse. One director cleared his throat. "Silas. Perhaps this is premature," I cut him off with a look. "Not when the company's integrity is already past due." Evan pushed back his chair and stood, his smile wobbling like a man performing confidence instead of feeling it. "This is mutiny," he shouted, voice echoing off the polished glass. I almost smiled. "No," I said, stepping closer. "This is Food Safety Executive Edition." A few nervous laughs flickered around the table before dying under Evan's glare. He turned toward me, red-faced, sputtering. "You think you can just come in here with some dusty paperwork?" And I raised the remote in my hand and clicked. The projector hummed back to life, this time showing not slogans, but screenshots, internal emails, expense reports, audit trails. The room darkened with the glow of evidence. "Let's review your flavor of transparency," I said, each word deliberate. "Here we have unreported supplier debts, doctored invoices, and a note from your finance chief asking, 'Should we move this to Q4 again?'" The room went dead quiet. No one looked at him now. They looked at me, the man they'd underestimated. Evan's voice broke the silence, smaller this time. "You can't do this." I already did. Lawrence, seated at my right, spoke up smoothly. "As majority shareholder, Mr. Ward's motion stands. By corporate statute, no secondary vote is required." The finality landed like a steel lid sealing shut. Evan's hands trembled as he gathered his notes, his chair screeching against the floor. He stormed toward the door without looking back. Just as the latch clicked, his phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a new message. Funding withdrawal confirmed due to leadership instability. He froze. The board saw it too. When the door shut behind him, I exhaled slowly. No applause, no celebration, just the quiet sound of a company breathing again. I straightened my jacket and looked around the table. Gentlemen, let's get back to work. I didn't move into the CEO's office right away. The title could wait. The people couldn't. The morning after the board meeting. I drove past the glass tower and went straight to Verdant's central warehouse, the real heart of the company. Though no one from the upper floors had set foot there in years, the air was thick with the smell of spices and metal, the rhythmic hiss of steam lines, and the low hum of conveyor belts that never slept. The workers looked startled when they saw me. A few froze mid-task, like someone had just switched off the background noise of their routine. "Go on," I said quietly. "Pretend I'm not here." But of course, that was impossible. For 15 years, management had only come down to issue orders, never to listen. I walked the aisles between crates and pallets, stopping to ask names, not titles. Luis, who'd been driving the same delivery route for 20 years, told me he hadn't had a pay raise in 5. Maria from the prep kitchen said the ovens hadn't been serviced since before the pandemic. The night shift team ate cold leftovers from the cafeteria when there were any. By midday, I'd heard enough to know the truth. Verdant Foods had become what Evan once called it, a food factory, not a company. Efficient, mechanical, soulless. My father had built it to feed hospitals, schools, and families with dignity. Now it was just feeding spreadsheets. I leaned against a steel counter, watching the workers move in a steady rhythm, and felt something tighten in my chest. Not anger, not pity, just the quiet realization that they deserved better. Starting today, I said to the shift supervisors, we fix this from the ground up. New pay scales, rotating shifts, hot meals for every crew, every night. Grace Moreno, the night shift lead, stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed. I remembered her, the one who'd covered double shifts during the pandemic, the one nobody ever promoted. "You're serious?" she asked. "Completely." She hesitated, then disappeared into the back office. When she returned, she held a worn, yellowed folder. "You should see this," she said, handing it to me. "I found it years ago in the old storage room. Thought it might matter someday." Inside were tax records and correspondence from my father's last year in charge files, proving he'd negotiated a deal that had saved Verdant from bankruptcy. The same documents Evan had claimed were lost in system updates. I stared at the familiar handwriting on the margin, my father's neat, looping signature, and felt the hum of the machines fade behind me. For the first time, I understood what rebuilding meant. It wasn't just policies and profit. It was resurrection. I closed the folder and looked at Grace. Let's make this place worthy of his name again. The first headline hit before sunrise. Verdant Foods, hostile takeover, veteran executive accused of seizing control. By 8 o'clock. My phone was vibrating nonstop. Reporters, investors, old colleagues pretending to check on me. Evan had gone on a media spree, painting himself as the visionary betrayed by a bitter subordinate. The story spread like grease fire. He sat in glossy lighting on a morning talk show, face powdered and tragic, calling me an outdated relic who hijacked a legacy he didn't build. I watched from my kitchen table, coffee untouched, while he gestured dramatically at a chart that made no mathematical sense. "Under my leadership," he declared, "Verdant saw record profits until Mr. Ward manipulated the board to oust me. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so expensive. Our investor line lit up, PR scrambled, and employees didn't know who to believe. For 48 hours, chaos became our new rhythm. Emails from legal, statements from HR, journalists camping outside the building. I said nothing, not a word. Silence, I've learned, starves a lie faster than outrage. Then Evan made his mistake. During a live interview, in his eagerness to appear transparent, he mentioned temporary reallocation of supplier funds for growth initiatives. He said it once, too quickly, and thought he'd moved on. But financial reporters are like bloodhounds. They catch the scent of contradiction better than lawyers do. Within hours, news sites began dissecting every phrase, and the word embezzlement started trending next to his name. By the third day, Verdant's reputation teetered like a pot left boiling unattended. So I called for a press conference. No lights, no PR team, just a podium in the warehouse cafeteria, surrounded by the same workers who had kept the company running while the executives chased hashtags. When the cameras rolled, I didn't read from a script. I looked straight into the lenses and said, "We're cleaning house both literally and figuratively." I let the words hang there, behind me. The sound of clattering trays and sizzling pans filled the silence, a reminder that this company still had a heartbeat. Reporters shouted questions about Evan, about lawsuits, about leadership chaos. I answered each with calm precision. No anger, no theater. Verdant will cooperate fully with any audit. I said, "Truth doesn't mind inspection." That night, the audit team arrived uninvited but very welcome. Within 24 hours, their findings leaked internal emails, forged invoices, redirected payments, and one final revelation that made the whole city blink. The anonymous whistleblower report that had triggered the investigation came from an IP address registered to Evan Coulter's personal account. I read the notice in my office, exhaled once, and closed the laptop. Vindication didn't taste sweet, it just tasted clean, like a kitchen finally free of smoke. He showed up unannounced, which was fitting. Men like Evan Coulter always believed doors open for them, even after they'd been locked. It was late afternoon, sunlight cutting across my office like sharp glass. He stood in the doorway, suit immaculate, eyes desperate. "Silas," he began, his voice rehearsed. "I think it's time we talk." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Talking's free. That's about the only thing that still is." He sat, smoothing his tie, trying to disguise the tremor in his hands. "I'm willing to cooperate," he said. "If you can make this whole thing disappear, the audits, the reports, I'll support your leadership publicly. You get the company's image back, and I get to keep a life." I leaned back, studying him. His cologne was the same blend of ambition and denial, I remembered, without a word. I poured 2 cups of coffee from the French press on the side table. The aroma filled the room, bitter and grounding. I pushed 1 cup toward him. "Black," I said. "No sugar. Tastes like your future." He flinched, forcing a smile. Always the comedian. Only when the material writes itself. He tried again, shifting from charm to reason. "Look, you've made your point. The company's yours. Just delete the records. We both know reputation is everything in this business." I stirred my own cup slowly, letting the silence stretch. "Reputation," I repeated. "You mean the thing you sold in bulk to fund your bonuses?" His jaw tightened. "You're enjoying this?" "Not really," I said. Voice level. "Justice has a slower rhythm than revenge. More like jazz. You have to let the pauses do the talking." He sighed, the performance cracking. "Please, Silas. I'm out of options." That part was true. And, for the first time, he looked like a man aware of his own reflection, smaller than the myth he'd built. I reached into my drawer and slid a single folder across the desk. "I thought you might come by," I said. "That's why I paid off your personal debt last week." His brow furrowed. "What debt? The one you took to cover your margin call?" The bank was eager to sell. He opened the folder, and I watched the color drain from his face as he read the paperwork. This can't be real." "Oh, it's real," I said softly. "As of last Friday, the note's mine. So technically, Evan, you don't just owe the bank anymore. You owe me." He looked up, speechless. I finished my coffee and stood, setting the empty cup beside his untouched one. "You wanted a clean slate. Consider this the down payment." He left without another word. The door clicked shut, leaving behind the faint smell of burnt pride and cooling coffee. When the dust finally settled, Verdant Foods didn't feel like the same company anymore, and that was exactly the point. The new sign over the entrance read, our new motto in bold green letters, "Feed with integrity." Simple, honest, a reminder of why this place existed long before spreadsheets started dictating flavor. The first months were quiet, deliberate. We tore down more policies than walls. The People First Kitchen program launched in April, profit sharing for every employee, full health coverage for their families, and scholarships for their children. No PR agency wrote it. No consultant pitched it. It came from late-night talks in the warehouse cafeteria, where the people who actually fed the nation finally got to feed back into the company. The changes didn't happen overnight. Some days felt like rebuilding a ship while sailing it, but the atmosphere shifted first in whispers, then in laughter. The warehouse music returned. Supervisors stopped hovering like prison guards. Grace Moreno started an employee suggestion board, and it filled up in a week not with complaints, but ideas. I visited every facility, every shift, every kitchen, instead of speeches. I asked questions. What's missing? What's working? What would make you proud to work here? They answered with the kind of honesty no boardroom could handle. Better tools, flexible shifts, real meals instead of vending snacks. By summer, we had a new cafeteria with fresh produce from local farms. I made sure every menu carried a small note cooked with respect. One afternoon, the communications team asked for new promotional photos. I told them no poses, no suits, no scripts. They followed me to the main kitchen instead. Lunch hour. The air thick with steam and laughter. I sat at the long metal table beside the staff, rolling up my sleeves as someone handed me a tray. Rice, chicken, beans, humble food, perfect balance. Cameras clicked as I took a bite and joined in their jokes. By evening, that photo was everywhere, a gray-haired man eating among the people who made him possible. No filters, no headlines, just one caption written by a warehouse worker. He eats what we eat. The next morning, my assistant stormed into my office, holding a printed email. You'll want to see this. It was from Nordic Supply International, one of Europe's largest distributors. They had been silent through all the chaos, watching from a distance. The letter was formal, but human. We've followed Verdant's transformation closely. We're prepared to sign a $300 million partnership on one condition. Mr. Silas Ward must personally oversee the project. I read it twice, then looked out the window at the workers unloading a new shipment, the hum of forklifts, the smell of spice and sunlight. For once, success didn't feel like revenge. It felt like belonging. A year later. Verdant Foods had become something unrecognizable, not because it was bigger, but because it was finally whole again. Revenue had reached its highest in company history. And last night, we received the Global Ethics Award, a recognition that once would have sounded like fantasy. Now, it felt earned, not through profit margins or clever branding, but through every small, honest decision made in quiet rooms where real people's hands built trust again. That afternoon, I walked through the main kitchen, the same one I had stood in as a boy beside my father. The air was warm with the scent of baked bread and simmering broth. Afternoon light streamed through the skylight, catching in the stainless steel counters and flickering like flame. Workers were still moving about, their laughter echoing off the tiled walls, the rhythm of life continuing without ceremony. At the far end, above the industrial ovens, hung a framed photo of my father, hand resting on the shoulder of a young boy in a white apron, the same boy who had once believed success meant noise and power. I stopped, staring at it for a long moment. The light shifted, reflecting across the glass and onto my hands. Energy never dies, I said quietly. It just finds a better cook. The words weren't meant for anyone else, but a few employees nearby paused, smiling softly before returning to their work. I could almost hear my father's chuckle, that low rumble that always came when he caught me burning toast and called it progress. When I left the kitchen, the corridor opened toward the boardroom where everything had begun: the first defeat, the first stand, and now, the first peace. As I passed the glass wall, a large monitor flickered to life behind me. A headline scrolled across in bold text: Verdant Foods, to provide meals for National Health Network, first ethical food supplier in history. I stopped mid-step, reading it once, then twice. A quiet laugh escaped me, not triumphant, just full. Finally, I murmured. The recipe worked. It wasn't victory I felt. It was reconciliation between generations, between logic and compassion, between what a company can make and what it can mean. Verdant had become what my father intended all along, a place that fed people, not egos, and somewhere in that balance, I learned the simplest truth: justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes It hums in the sound of a kitchen running right. If you've ever believed integrity couldn't win in business, maybe this story says otherwise. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight, and if you believe in stories where dignity still matters, where people rebuild what others tried to destroy. Leave a comment, share this story, and subscribe for more. Because sometimes, justice doesn't end in noise, it ends in peace.